When Robert E. Lee took the Army of Northern Virginia north into Pennsylvania for the Gettysburg Campaign, midway through the war, he issued the famous General Order number 73 to all his soldiers. And this is how it read, a portion of it. It must be remembered that we make war only upon armed men, and that we cannot take vengeance for the wrongs our people have suffered without lowering ourselves in the eyes of all whose abhorrence has been excited by the atrocities of our enemies, and offending against him to whom vengeance belongeth, and without whose favor and support our efforts must all prove in vain. The commanding general therefore earnestly exhorts the troops to abstain with most scrupulous care from unnecessary or wanton injury to private property, and he enjoins upon all officers to arrest and bring to summary punishment all who shall in any way offend against the orders on this subject. End quote. And again, we were speaking of context earlier. What was the context here? His own country was being burned down behind him. How deeply must he have held to these principles to not execute vengeance and retribution, which, by the way, many Southern critics of his, even long after the war, even including some people that were pro-Southern and wrote some famous books, they blamed him for us losing because he would not take the torch to the North. Well, perhaps he felt like there were principles more important even than winning a war, even if it meant suffering afterwards. And I might add for us gathered today, are we not thankful that he did retain his honor? With such a combination of forces pressuring him not to do so? God grant us the strength as individuals to retain our own honor or to regain it in our days of trial and temptation, especially for some of us far from home, that our legacy in life would be an inspiration to our own children and others, and not a byword or object of scorn and contempt. Well, tens of thousands of Lee's soldiers drew strength and consolation from their faith to endure the many horrors of war while Southern fortunes prospered, and they did all the more after events turned against the South. The benefits of the great revival in the Southern armies shone all the more after the war, as thousands of ex-Confederate soldiers emulated the example of Lee, John Gordon, and others, and applied their energies and talents to provide for their dependents and to rebuild their land. Though some former soldiers did resort to unlawful and even violent behavior following the war, no doubt many more would have without the profound influence of Lee and the Christian faith on them. Ironically, though, I would suggest to you that Robert E. Lee's greatest legacy is perhaps as a peacemaker rather than a warrior. I know that maybe the books aren't as exciting and they don't sell as well, but I think it was Bill Gothard said that it's God that writes the final chapters. And dare I say that that legacy holds much import for us today as we resist the temptation ourselves of bitterness, cynicism, and unchristian feelings toward the many individuals, organizations, and movements who differ with us and who attack us at times, as we resist it even too often toward each other. Following the war, the South lay in rubble, its manhood decimated, a harsh federal military occupation further crushing it, and financial opportunists descending upon it from across the United States. If only Abraham Lincoln held the power to end or continue North-South hostilities before and after the war commenced, not even he possessed that power once it ended. Only Lee did. Many Northerners desired the utter destruction of the South as a recognizable culture. Meanwhile, bitterness and hatred filled most former Confederates. Lee recognized the issue was no less than the survival of the Southern people and their civilization. And I commend to you a book many of you are probably familiar with, Lee, The Last Years, by Charles Braceland Flood, a masterful work of the years following the war in Lee's life and his impact on the whole country, not just the South. And indeed, wisdom formed his thoughts and actions. He rebuked younger ex-Confederate officers who advocated continuing the war with guerrilla tactics. He refused to countenance or support large-scale emigration of Confederates to foreign lands. He urged Southerners to work lawfully and cheerfully. Sometimes I can do the lawful part, but that cheerful part's hard, isn't it? Within the existing laws of the United States, to rebuild their fortunes and their land. And most of all, he beseeched them to forgive and forget wrongs committed against them by Federals past and present. He counseled one of his many lovely but bitter young female admirers, 17-year-old Marylander Christiana Bond, whose own family and home had been wrecked by the Federal Army. It seemed as though some of the best haters in that era were the young people. They had been so hurt and lost so many loved ones, and they did not understand it. This is what he told Christiana Bond. I want you to take a message to your friends. Tell them from me that it is unworthy of them as women, and especially as Christian women, to cherish feelings of resentment against the North. Tell them that it grieves me inexpressibly to know that such a state of things exists, and that I implore them to do their part to heal our country's wounds. Well, all the while, offers and opportunities cascaded in from around the South, across the United States, and even other nations. I believe Lord Acton wanted him to come on over to England and not just write letters, but probably be there for tea every day. Railroads, insurance companies, corporations of every stripe offered the Virginian positions of leadership. He was offered sprawling estates, indeed, in England, the land of his forefathers, for life at no cost. Leaders of the Democratic Party, most of them former federal military officers, campaigned him to accept their party's nomination for United States President in 1868 and to oppose Republican nominee U.S. Grant. Some of these guys that write these alternate history books, you know, about what would have happened if we had AK-47s and all that. Yeah. What would have happened if those two had squared off for president? Wow. Well, lost my place there. Oh, yeah. Some of the North's most powerful newspapers cheered him on in print. They wanted him to run and just beat Grant to death for president. I guess America was getting back to normal by then. But often as he did, despite his simple dignity and guileless ways, he surprised nearly everyone. He took instead the helm of tiny, broke, war-ravaged, sacked and plundered Washington College in the backwater Virginia mountain village of Lexington, where old Jack spent the decade before the war. With no assistant, scant budget, and beset by the burgeoning health problems of his aging body, Lee set about rebuilding the school, placing special emphasis on what curricula would best prepare the young men of the South to rebuild their land. In fact, he spearheaded the launching of the first full-blown college journalism program in America. We know Washington College now, of course, as Washington and Lee University. Yet many times, in many ways, he voiced his primary concern. Reverend Thomas J. Kirkpatrick, professor of moral philosophy at Washington College, recalled Lee's words, quote, "Oh, doctor, if I could only know that all the young men in this college were good Christians, I should have nothing